Panel. Good afternoon. Any excellencies, any royal highnesses in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Zainab Badawi. Panel, do take your chair. I'm not going to live up to that billing. I'm really... No, sorry, Femi. I'm very, very nice today. Soft talk all the way. And it's my pleasure to be at this Eat Food Forum here in Stockholm. You all know how to eat very well here. It was a delicious lunch I had. So as Femi said, we're going to be discussing the business aspect of what you've been talking about this morning. We all know that it's easy to say that what's good for people is good for the planet, it's good for the consumer, it's good for business and so on. But the bottom line is, can you actually make the business case for sustainability, nutrition and climate? Is it going to work? Because obviously you've got competing interests, and it's easy to pay lip service and point to one or two examples, but the bottom line is, can you satisfy your shareholders and the planet and nutrition at the same time? Well, we've got some key leaders here who all believe that you can square that difficult circle. And Stefan, you're smiling, so let me come to you. Stefan, Dr. Stefan Katsikas. He is Executive Vice President at Nestlé. He's also the Chief Technology Officer. And Stefan, I know that you have a PhD in neuroscience. So you've got a big brain, which is why I've come to you first. So you can give us an idea of whether you feel that you really can make a business case for what we're discussing. Can you do it? And will you tell us later how you are doing it at Nestlé? But just broadly speaking, is the answer yes?
Yes.
You can elaborate. You can elucidate a little bit.
Since I am the science person at Nestlé, maybe what I could say to start and break the ice is that Nestlé has a very strong scientific drive. So we try to have science at the very onset of what we do. In the case of nutrition, we try to understand nutritional needs, and we try to identify unmet nutritional needs. We also have an entire group. We have a council of sustainable nutrition. So I think the answer is yes, not only we can, but we are doing it. At least we are trying very hard. Mm-hmm. Now, the complexity of the problem is such, as the meeting has shown until today, that we cannot do it alone. No company can do it alone.
Okay.
So we need a new partnership. Academic partners, industrial partners, government, and each of us, if we can find the right way where we can contribute and use our excellence, maybe we will be successful.
Are you finding all this very interesting? Because you've had a background as an academic. You were at the University of Lausanne for many years, and also you had a stint at the King Abdullah University in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where you were in the technology department, and also a stint at Glaxo. So did you always think this, or are you discovering something new since you've joined Nestlé on this topic?
Well, I'm certainly discovering something new, for sure. Well, my previous life was much about medicine. I was a professor at the School of Medicine, as you know. So caring about people has always been at the center of my own activities. Now, joining a company like Nestlé, and when you are inside, you discover many things that you don't see from the outside. And many of the things that outsiders feel may be public relation or advertisement are actually core values of the company. Mm-hmm. The most impressive one for me was discovering creating shared value of what it really means. Of course, we work in the interest of our shareholders. This is about money, as we said today. But it goes well beyond this. We care about all the stakeholders, from the farm to the consumer.
OK, good. Azita Shariati. Very nice to see you, and very nice to have a woman on the panel to keep me company as well. You are CEO of Sodexo Sweden, and Sodexo, of course, as most of you know, is the French Food Services, a huge multinational corporation which was set up by one French individual in the 1950s. Is that right? And now you're the 19th biggest employer in the world. You employ precisely 420,000 people in about 80 countries where you're based. So a phenomenal amount of food passes through your hands, 75 million people you feed every day?
We meet 75.
Do you know, I have 4 children and I feel like I'm feeding 75 million every day. It's a nightmare. They all want to eat different things. Anyway, so you've been in this position since 2011. Yes. So from your perspective, do you think you can integrate all this sustainability into the business model?
Absolutely. This is already an integrated part of our business. And it's not about only the only from an environmental perspective. It's about actually how you as a company can attract people to your company, how you can create a culture of in your company that you can actually contribute to better society. It's not only about to feed 75 million people in the earth. Is about how we together can take responsibility.
So it's creating a new business culture, as it were, trying to win over minds.
It's about to create a purpose of being, actually. Why you have a company? Yes, a company is built of their employees, the shareholder, and the society they are on. And we as a company are responsible to get all these stakeholders in the same place, with the same platform, and discuss about what are we as a company and what type of responsibility we take. And of course, the money is part of that. And in these days, I think all the company think about their quarterly report. Of course, you need to deliver the figures to your shareholder and to the market. But when the company have a higher ambition and take more responsibility for the society, for the planet, for the employees, then you are coming to make more money.
I'll come back to this later, but do you think it's much easier for Sodexo to do this? Because it is still a family-owned business, although it is on the French stock exchange, the family are in control, and therefore it is easier for them to carry out their vision if that's what they believe in.
No, I don't think this is about, is it the family-owned or is it another type of ownership of the company? It's about what type of value and the business integrity you have in your company. This is all about that.
Okay. Another doctor, Dr. Michael Grosser, except you have a PhD in engineering, and you worked at BMW and then Ford, and then you decided to join Tetra Pak more than about 13 years ago, where you are in charge. You are also executive vice president there, but you're in charge of their development and service operations. So Tetra Pak, we all know, of course, is a global business. You don't actually make anything, you just process food and you package it. So a slightly different, line of work from Nestlé, for instance, and Sodexo. But what's your answer to this question? Can you really do it?
Well, I think we are rather lucky in Tetra Pak because we were founded really on the basis of a commitment and a promise to the food system in a way. And this is really said in one sentence, is we commit making food safe and available everywhere. And I think it's a fantastic mission, not only to the way of how we drive business, but equally how each and every of our 23,000 people actually believe in terms of their convictions, their values, and the way of how they make decisions. And we heard today, this morning from Mr. Nwanze, I think a very good call to action that we should talk a little bit less about what could be done and what we good to do, but very much about what have we done and what will we do. And if we look in the change that we need in the food system, for us, it's very much about three things. It's about teaming up and partnering up in the entire food system, really from the farmer to the consumer, and what knowledge, what values can we bring to that party? Secondly, it's really about innovation. And I truly believe that we today heard a lot of new questions that we didn't ask before. We have to innovate and find technologies that address problems and solve issues. But at the same time, we have to get rid of a few convictions and challenge our way of working that had led to the problems we have today.
We'll hear about some of the innovative things that you say that you're doing at Tetra Pak in a moment. But let's just come to Matt Kovac here, who, despite his former Yugoslavia sounding name, you're British, and you are based in Singapore, where you are Executive Director of Food Industry Asia, which I guess does what it says on the tin. But you represent quite a large number of private sector companies, and you're the kind of interface for them with governments and academia and NGOs and so on and so forth. So you deal only, obviously, with Asia, so it's slightly different set of principles perhaps from you based here in Europe and so on. But do you feel that you can make a business case for sustainability?
Absolutely. I think what we find, Asia Pacific is just a region, but it's the same globally, that many of the companies that we represent individually are looking at different business models, looking at sustainable business models and how they can change. Our role is to try and bring many of those companies together to build public-private partnerships, working with civil society, NGOs, government and academia in the pre-competitive areas. So that could be on food safety or it could be on health and nutrition as well. And there is a huge appetite for those companies to bring their best practices and learning from many of their CSR programs and other initiatives and projects that they're doing, identify the ones that are working well, and then try and see how we might scale those up. And I think that's, for us in Asia Pacific, that's the future of the public-private partnerships that we want to focus on delivering into the markets and actually having action on the ground.
You talk about CSR, Matt, corporate social responsibility, but really what we are talking about goes beyond that, doesn't it, really? I mean, you know, there are some who've done away with it, like Paul Polman at Unilever. It says, you know, it's not something that is just kind of a department where you might put, you know, parking services for the corporation, you know, CSR is another department. It's something which has got to be very much integrated. I know you worked as a journalist for many, many years before you joined Food Industry Asia. So perhaps you've got a good idea of what the consumer would also want or expect from, you know, the private sector. And basically they want good, affordable food, don't they, on the whole, if they are quite enlightened. And that's the point. Is what you're talking about really affordable for business, or is it a more expensive way of producing food and selling it?
No, of course, consumers want affordable food, yeah? But I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that many of the consumers, actually, if we look at places like where there's rapid urbanization, like Singapore, big cities like Shanghai, and rising amount of middle-class citizens there, they actually want more transparency and more information. So nutrition literacy, that's a massive part of there's a significant demand from the companies, from consumers. And I think that's an area in particular that our organisation, working with the companies, and how we might be able to promote nutrition literacy campaigns to improve the education levels of not just adults but children as well.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, so if we're talking about affordability in this context, thinking about people, I know you prefer to call the consumer people rather than the consumer. In order for something to be sustainable, it's got to be affordable, really. So, you know, you've said that you can satisfy the shareholder and do what you want to do, but what about the consumer? Can you really give them something that is good and affordable? Because anybody goes into a supermarket and it's the cheaper food is the one that's more highly processed, it's not as healthy.
Well, just to go back to the people versus consumer, as you know, Nestlé has embarked in a journey that goes from a food and beverage company to a nutrition, health and wellness company. So we also address patients. So when we say people, we mean not necessarily consumer or patients, but the people that trust our products. All right. Now, we have a very large portfolio, as you all know, and this portfolio can go from the highest premiumized products to what we call PPP. So it's the same acronym we heard this morning, but not the same meaning. For us, it means popularly positioned products. And we really have as a commitment to be able to deliver to anyone, and that anyone should be able to afford products that actually will be less costly for them, but that goes through exactly the same gates when it comes to food safety, which is, of course, a mandatory, unquestionable and mandatory, but also more important and directly relevant, I believe, to this meeting and to this audience, the nutritional value of those products. Maybe one of the best examples is fortification. So few people know that Nestlé last year has sold close to 200 billion servings of fortified products. Many of those, of course, target specific deficit in the emerging economies and developing worlds, whatever the word means. But we also have undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies in the Western world. So for us, this is really a key priority and maybe a good example addressing your question of delivering added value nutrition in products that are affordable.
But so that works in emerging markets. I mean, maybe give us an example. I know you've done some work in Asia, for instance, in South Asia.
Well, I can tell you the easiest example is the bouillon cube. You know, the bouillon cube that everybody uses as a culinary aid is now fortified with iron, with zinc, with members of the vitamin B, like B12 family. So that is a tangible example of what has been used all over the world. We do many work in Asia as well. I mean, milk and dairy products are also fortified and are actually a very good vehicle to deliver added value nutritional products. But again, I think it's...
And it's not more costly for you to inject the bouillon cubes with
Well, I can tell you, it comes with a cost, but we do it, and we have done it for many years without even talking about it, because we are convinced that that needs to be done. And that if the largest player in the field doesn't do it and doesn't try, with all humility, to be somewhat of a role model, then others may find it even more difficult to follow.
So it is more costly. So there is a price to pay.
There is a price to pay.
It would affect your profit margins when you do it, as you do.
All right. I'm on the money panel, but I am the science, right? So you have to call my...
you can't have a cop-out like that. But
the answer is yes, again.
It does have a
It comes with a
cost,
price, and you have to organize yourself to be able to protect interest throughout the value.
Then, is it only the large multinational corporations, such as Nestlé, who have the economies of scale, who can afford then to pay this kind of attention to nutrition in their products?
Well, it depends on your scale, as you put it. You know, there are many local, regional companies that focus on a much smaller segment of consumers that can afford to do it at their local, regional level. Our challenge is that as soon as we do something, we try to scale it up. And therefore, we do need the infrastructure to actually address exactly your question, yes. And it is easier for us because for many, many years, we have invested in science and technology, and so we have the tools to do it. And now what is very actually stimulating for us, even if understandably so, very often we are under attack, and we are criticized because we are large, we are big. But what is very stimulating is to see the level of awareness, thanks to meetings like this one and other meetings around the world, that is now touching not only people and consumers, but also government organizations, non-governmental organizations. So again, this goes back to the fact that we are too small and not powerful enough to address the issue in its complexity. We need to find partners and to work in a sincere way. Again, and actually in this room, you have many of my former academic colleagues that I'm very pleased to see again. I'm still the same person, right?
We don't know whether you're poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher.
Right.
You'll be one or the other. But
both.
what do the panel think about this particular issue of trying to do, bring the business practices into sustainability? Really can only be done by the large corporations, and that perhaps with the smaller, medium enterprises that are involved in food processing, manufacture and farming and so on, it's going to be much harder because they are looking at their profit margins much more carefully, and indeed their financial survival. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. At the same time, I think we should as well be encouraged by some of the small things that you can do. And I want to give you one example. I mean, we were really there asked by a dairy customer in Bangladesh in order to say, look, we have a problem to basically supply and get enough supply of good quality milk. And thereby, our products actually don't reach the consumer. They are spoiled, they are wasted. And so the best thing for us was actually simply go there and understand how does the dairy system actually work in the developing countries. And you would find out that there are many of these smallholder farmers that have hardly, let's say, 2 or 3 cows, each of them 2 or 3 liters every day. They would sell that milk themselves or to a middleman. The milk gets spoiled because it's not refrigerated, it's lost. And, of course, very low income. So we thought about, can we connect these 2 dots? Can we connect the smallholder farmers with the dairy producer? And in fact, what we've done is we trained the farmers in order to increase the yield of their cows by better animal husbandry and welfare systems and simple practices. It increased basically the yield of the cows from 2 or 3 liters to 5 or 6 liters, and it given the farmers a stable income because, of course, the dairy producer wants to get access of that milk.
And you reduce wastage by a phenomenal amount, something like, was it 15% down to 1.4%? Oh, that was you guys.
That was us. You see,
in Pakistan,
same kind of thing you did.
Well, it's about 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, we found out, and others did and published, that in our value chain end-to-end in Pakistan for milk, there was about 15% waste.
Right.
And so we went into every detail, and you're right. It goes down to meeting each farmer that may have only 2 or 3 cows and some bigger operations. And we had to go step to step, and it took us almost 10 years. But a few weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago, we presented in Rome that we were able to go from 15 waste to 1.5, so a tenfold reduction.
Yeah. But Michael, I mean, so you did that, and as you say, you brought the producers with the dairy process and so on. But I mean, Tetra Pak, obviously, you have the packaging with the aluminium inside, which means you can basically have long life milk, what we would call long life milk. But you need plants for that. So how do you do that? I mean, that must take 2 or 3 years to build a plant so that you cut down on the wastage. It's not something you can, that must be quite an expensive bit of outlay.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix. I think whatever we do there is something that you need to do with conviction and persistence, because you have to do and work on this, and scale it up all the time. So there's fundamental investment that has to go in. So you need to find as well a producer that is really willing to put the investment, to believe in this and see a growth of their business. And we find these examples, but again, I think the mindset that this is possible, and we have to find ways to find many places, not only in Asia, but as well in Africa, to make the sustainability sustainable, because it makes business sense.
And you did that as kind of CSR, did you? Really? Was that part of your CSR portfolio?
We did it basically really under a program that we call Food for Development. But today we do it as business. We say, okay, we provide the knowledge and the technology to keep the product fresh and stable without refrigeration. That's the benefit to the consumer.
Because you'll have more producers using your products. Your packaging.
Yeah.
So it's kind of enlightened self-interest.
Yeah, of course it is. You know,
Right.
I mean,
Good.
sustainability needs to make business sense. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
I think
Aziza
if you put
Shariat,
it,
yeah.
yes, I think if you put it in the heart of your business, and you actually describe for all the stakeholders why you are going to do it, because then you can see the impact of it. Today we are talking about the food and waste food. Let me give you an example what we have done in Sweden. Actually, we're buying about half a billion Swedish krona a year only food in Sweden. And of course, the food cost is one of the biggest costs we have in our company. And then even we impact the environment a lot. We decided 2012 to start it in autumn 2012 to start it with a waste program, and we decided to have it as a part of our business, not about a project or about a campaign. We decided to have it as a part of daily job, and we started with a 10 pilot because it's very important when you want to drive a change in the mindset of the people and even change a structure, you need to test it before. We started with a 10 pilot, and after 6 weeks when we saw that everything is working, we implemented the new way of working in 300 restaurants in Sweden. Since 2013, we saved about 400 ton food. That means if you put the money on that,
It's a huge saving.
this is a huge saving. If you calculate it, that each kilo food is about 35 Swedish krona, then you can read it in the bottom line how much profit actually you have saved. And in the same way, if you look at the impact in the environment, the
It's a
saving,
win-win
yes, so this is a
situation, you
win-win
say.
situation.
So tackling
Yes.
food waste has
Yeah.
actually got an economic business imperative
Absolutely.
at the bottom
And
of it.
in same times, we have more engaged people who actually take care of the environment. We have even some discussion with our clients and had more deeper cooperation with them, because then we are going to work as a company who take the responsibility. And I think it's very important why we successful with this implementation. That was the top management decided to do it. This was very important. It wasn't something you put it in the organization and said, here you have a brochure and then you're going to implement it. We follow up each and every month since 2013. And because of that, we can say it, yes, after a while. In the beginning was a long startup to convince people. And then we thought, the people, now is the part of the business.
So it needs, you think it needs the person at the top to drive it?
I'm definitely sure that you need
And
it.
what's your answer to the question? Because we saw one that comes up as well, which is, do you have to be big in business in order to drive changes in the food industry? Do you think you have to be big?
I think, of course, in this case, size is different, is important. But of course, when you want to change something in your society, you need to interact with everyone. Everyone has some part in that. I think you need a better cooperation between the big and
I'm just
small
looking at these, because you can all ask questions or Twitter, and it says sustainability must make business sense, otherwise it's not sustainable. I think you all said that's true.
I want to pick up on that point. When you said about you have to be big, I think there's a responsibility for some of the bigger companies to support SMEs as well. If you take food safety in Asia, across Asia Pacific, it's a pre-competitive area. There is a responsibility for some of the bigger companies to strengthen their supply chains by training SME suppliers. It's absolutely essential. And there are programs, for example, the Global Food Safety Partnership, which is convened by the World Bank, FAO, and WHO as well as regulators, to look at how they would put in place capacity building programs with SMEs to improve food safety. Yeah, and that's taking the private sector and some of their best practices and helping to train those SMEs. And those SMEs, as they improve and they get better, they have more access to other markets and to other companies that they want to export to as well.
You bring up the issue of food safety, because in Asia that's been a particular concern for a lot of consumers, with some food products being adulterated and so on, and they've really lost a great deal of confidence in the business food industry. That is also part of all this that we're discussing.
Yes, I mean, the specific example, perhaps you're suggesting is about China, and there has been some issues around food safety. And so last year they introduced some of the toughest legislation in their history to look at or to implement stronger food safety systems. Now, it's not just on enforcement, which is a big challenge in China. It's actually on prevention and changing consumer behaviour. But I think a major part of food safety, in particular in markets across Asia Pacific, you have to address issues around food culture. I think that sort of spreads into health and nutrition as well. And there are very different approaches in Asia Pacific to how people deal with food. And I think that's something that has to be addressed quite significantly, and is.
But a big problem in Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia and so on is the rise of non-communicable diseases, in particular diabetes, for instance, and people being very overweight but actually malnourished, funnily enough. So where does the consumer fit in all this? Because surely you said you need somebody at the top to drive better practices and so on, but the consumer also has got to take some responsibility to demand more of their food business, in the supermarkets and so on and so forth. It's not just something that business must do. And is there an appetite for the consumer to, ask for more?
Certainly, let's take Singapore as an example. Certainly in Singapore, amongst consumers, there's definitely a demand for more transparency, and that's through labelling schemes as well. So in Singapore, they have guideline daily amounts, but they also have a healthy choice logo as well. And you have to adhere to certain nutrition criteria to get this logo on your product. And so consumers actually want that, and the way they shop and the way they're to a certain degree, they are changing some of their behaviour. But in other markets as well across Asia Pacific, there's a lot to do with local food culture. Now, to be honest, sometimes some of the multinationals are much maligned, but there's a lot of local food culture where people are eating local foods that are very high in salt, sugar and fat. And this is something that governments are having to address now, particularly with type 2 diabetes, where there is a predisposition amongst Indians, Chinese and Malay for this. So the way that they're looking at it is how to build specific public-private partnerships. Okay, and there's one that's been built called ARAFIN, which is the Asia Roundtable on Innovation for Improved Nutrition, with the Singapore Ministry of Health, as well as other ministries across Southeast Asia. And they want to look at what the economic cost or the economic burden is of obesity and chronic diseases. So a report's been commissioned that will be out in October to look at exactly this: what type of interventions have worked and what's not working and what needs to be done about it.
But coming back to the business case and so on, I mean, how far do you think that the consumer really can drive this kind of agenda, and how far do they actually want to? Because I come back to the point, that governments impose tax on sugar tax that we're just having in the United Kingdom is coming in 2 or 3 years. India has introduced a sugar tax and so on. I mean, where does the initiative come from? Should it be something that the big food industries, you have a lot of products, they've got a lot of sugar in them, your chocolate and so on and so forth, which I know is delicious, but it has got a lot of sugar. So, where should that come? Do you have to say, well, look, we're going to make these products more expensive because they're not so healthy, or what?
Well, I think this highlights exactly what we have been talking about before and in other panels, that the problem is so vast and complex that you need a multi-stakeholder approach. So consumers, especially the next generation, the millennials, are really seeking for more natural products. So this is one big trend that we have to listen to, because at the end we work for them. We are at their service, all right? The fact that governments governments do realize that it is now important to put more stringent rules and frameworks, and that the regulatory context is changing, is not only important, it is actually essential. And we are very comfortable with that. If you want,
because there's a question there, how do we reconcile the actions of the private sector when they lobby against regulation, e.g. the sugar tax?
Well, no, we didn't lobby, actually.
No,
we were very clear that we are not against taxes. We did raise the fact that in some cases where this has been implemented, people then find way out. So one has to be careful. So in other words, taxes are not enough. But, we have been removing, first gradually and now massively, sugar from our product for the last 10 years. And actually, this is very important, because short term, we used advanced technologies to do that. Longer term, what we have to do all together, and again, this is the right agreement for that, is to get people used to different taste. In other words, we are really transitioning from what consumer want or wanted to what they might need. And the fact is that sugar is very pleasant. If you put a sugar drop on the lip of a baby, you will see a smile. So we have to be able to manage this expectation, and at the same time, again, doing and fulfilling our role. We are not here to educate the planet, but we can contribute with our knowledge and with our science to explain that too much sugar is not good. And again, actually, within Nestlé, without going into numbers, removing sugar and salt and certain fats is actually the most expensive project in R&D as we speak. Every year, we have thousands of products that are renovated with the simple goal to actually make them healthier from that point of view. So
less sugar, but try to maintain the taste is the challenge you'll find.
Well, you see, that's the other thing. Yes, for the moment, we are focusing on maintaining taste. If we could manage to educate better, to put nutrition at school, maybe instead of molecular neuroscience, by the way, but just focus on teaching young future consumers how really to address food and how to have healthier lives. Having sports, having an active lifestyle. All of this is part of the solution to the problem that now everybody sees.
So, Michael, I know, talking about the role of technology, we've talked about, how you can meet the consumers' needs in a way that they may themselves not actually realise they should be eating, less sugar, because some consumers don't take that kind of responsibility for themselves. But just thinking of the planet and in terms of waste and so on, so Tetra Pak, you have all these packaging, and I mean, you are the biggest in the field globally, but a lot of your products still obviously have to use aluminium, because that's how you keep the product on the shelf for a long time. So in terms of the technology that you're looking at, are we going to get to the stage where you can actually have the packaging completely renewable and not just recyclable as it is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we are really driven by a fantastic statement of our founder, Ruben Rausing, who said already in the 40s that a package should save more than it costs. And that is meant both in the economical and the ecological way. And we think about really 3 areas there. The one is indeed the idea that a pack that can grow back. So it's to try to copy the smart idea of renewable energy and translate that into the packaging industry. Can we make a fully plant-based package? And indeed, last year we achieved that by launching our first 100% renewable package that is completely based on plant materials. The other one is then indeed the topic of recycling. And I think the whole idea of the take, make, and throw away society has come to its physical limits. it's very clear that we will have to find the recipes to deal with the way of how we recycle. And one of the topics here is really, and it's another partnership approach that is required, because there are countries like Germany where recycling rates are 60% and more. And what does it take? It takes legislation that encourages the right behavior. It requires technology that can make that scalable and cheap. And it requires the consumer to be aware and be conscious about that.
All right, so just in the final closing minute, really, just very quickly, the biggest challenge and barriers facing, the food sector in achieving a more sustainable agenda and, business practices. Let's just start this way. Matt.
So I would say, certainly from my perspective, is looking at the general health and nutrition. So if you look at the issues around obesity and other chronic diseases, this is a big, very, very complex subject. And I saw one of the comments actually on screen that just said, about something to do with someone's a Star Wars fan talking about the private sector on the dark side. I think, look, there's a lot of pressure now. We know that the rates of obesity and chronic diseases are escalating. I think now's the time where corporations have done quite a lot in terms of the reformulation of their products. But I think probably now we need to look at trying to accelerate some of that process and looking at other companies, not just the multinationals, but big regional, big local companies to join in that as well.
Azita?
For me, from my perspective, is actually communication and level of awareness. Because right now, generally, when we look at, for example, to the different menus and how you can decrease the carbon footprint from each meals or the menus, we have some difficulty to discuss with our guests and the parents that the only protein sure is not red meal. Or is not the dairy. It's about not to educate people, but give them more understanding about that you have more sources to use and you can create very good and delicious food.
Take the fight to the individual. That's the big challenge. Yeah. I agree with you on that. My 4 kids are terrible. Yes. Michael?
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and indeed it's very much about behavior and mindset. And it starts with ourselves. Are we able to live with our own convictions and beliefs that sustainability is key to the business? In fact, it is our business. And we need to accept that this is not a 100-meter sprint. This is a marathon. And it takes a lot of small steps with a lot of continuous improvement mindset to make it work.
We didn't have anybody from the supermarket here to tell us why they always put the sweets at the checkout counter when you're with the kids, which is a nightmare. Stefan, final word.
All right, so two very quick comments, especially after what I can read here on the left and for the discussion. Obviously, for us specifically, one hurdle will be perception. There is no matter how much reality we put into making better foods, if people continue to perceive that large companies are necessarily bad, everything that we try to do will be difficult. And now, maybe on a more scientific basis and scientific ground, we are trying to find a global solution for something that eventually will have a very strong personalized dimension. And we now know, because we do research and work in this area, that if you give exactly the same food to 2 different people, if you give exactly the same food to 2 identical twins, their physiological reaction may be different. And this will be probably, from a scientific point of view, one of the biggest challenges.
All right, well, thank you all very much indeed for bringing your own insights and perspectives on this question of the money, business practices and sustainability. You all think it can be done. You've explained the barriers. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you also for your comments. Thank you. Goodbye from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.